Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. I'm Carly Letts, and it's a pleasure to be here with you hosting our panel, Learn It's panel on Build Better Learning Habits. I'm so thrilled to be joined by Damon Lembi, CEO of Learn It, Kristen Manieri, acclaimed author, podcaster, host, writer, and Matt Moralski, VP of Partnerships at Learn It. Before we get into the conversation, I want to just say hi, welcome to everyone on YouTube, all of our clients and partners tuning in. We'd love to hear from you in the chat on where you're tuning in from this morning, maybe what you're drinking, what coffee, beverage, tea, what you're sipping on. Share some love in the chat, and we'd love to hear from you. As we're doing that too, I just want to say that I'll be monitoring the chat throughout this discussion. So we have a lot of talking points and great things to share today, and a lot of insights from our amazing panelists. But if you have a specific question, please share it in the chat. Again, we really want to hear from you, and this is meant to be interactive as well. So keep it coming in the chat. We'd love to hear where you're tuning in from and what your drink of choice is this morning. While you're doing that, I want to get into our introductions for our panelists. So we'll start with Kristen. Kristen, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being part of our panel. Can you share a little bit more from your perspective, just your story and why learning is important to you in the work you do?
Sure. So my work that I do in the world is I split my time between being a coach. I coach people, couples. I coach people who just are stuck in career or in life. And then I also have my own podcast called 60 Mindful Minutes. My book came out a couple of years ago called All About Mindful Habits, Daily Mindful Habits. And really my whole life, when I really started to think about this question of like how much lifelong learning is really integrated into my life, I reflected on it last night and realized there was only about 6 years, and I'll be 47 this year, that learning wasn't like a focal point of my life out of all of, almost 5 decades that I've lived. And I think it's because I feel like I'm thriving when I'm learning. In fact, for years after I graduated university, I would get the September blues. September would roll around, the day after Labor Day would roll around, and it was like, I'm not in school anymore. And so I think as an adult, and I'll say this speak for all of us, we have to sort of put ourselves back into school. And so I've spent probably the last 2 decades doing that since I graduated and figuring out a way to make it just part of my daily life that I'm constantly learning. So I'm excited to share more about some of those tools and practices and habits that I use, and maybe inspire or just make it easier for other people to have more learning in their life on a daily basis.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kristen. And I love that concept of the September blues. I've never really identified it, but I feel that I've felt that way before as well, especially in those years out of school when you're transitioning and you miss that. So I love that. Damon, thank you so much for being here, for really spearheading this event and this panel, and the concept of really being a lifelong learner at Learn It, but also in just everything you're doing with your book as an author, and just really is who you are, is a lifelong learner, and promoting that internally. So anyways, can you share a little bit about just your background and why this is important to you before we go into our full discussion?
Great. Thanks, Carly. And I'd like to say, well, first of all, September blues, there are, excuse me, a lot of great birthdays in September. I know Matt's one of them, and myself and my daughter and a couple other people. So yeah, but there are some September blues. Thank you for setting this up. The idea really came from Kristen. When I was on her show, we talked a lot about learning. And so that's great. I'm really grateful she's here today, along with Matt and yourself. My name is, again, Damon Lembi. I'm the CEO of Learn It. I've been here for about 28 years, and we're all about learning here, both for our customers and for our internally. And I'm not really sure when it started that I became so excited about learning. I wasn't a fantastic student in school. My focus was really on sports and baseball. And when my baseball career ended and I got into, when I had a couple of opportunities, I started off at this computer training company as a receptionist, Learn It, and fast forward 28 years, here we are. And never my wildest dreams would I imagine I'd be running a company like this. But learning is at the key of everything we do, and it's very exciting. And I've always been excited about it. And I'd also like to say, before we move on, I'd like to say hello to my 90-year-old grandmother-in-law, Lulu, who's just celebrated her 90th birthday, and I know is here watching us today. So hello, Lulu.
Hi, Lulu. See, yeah, lifelong learning. That's amazing.
There you go.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you, Damon. Matt, hi. Thank you so much for being here. Matt, it's great to be here with you. And as the VP of Partnerships and Alliance Programs for Learn It, you've spearheaded so many creative learning programs for clients, but also internally been a champion of micro learning and getting our team together to learn every day and do different creative things as a team. So thank you for being internally inspiring, and also, all the work you do out in the world. But can you share a little bit about just your background, maybe your role at Learn It, and why learning is important to you?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, no, it's awesome to be here, and excited to talk about this topic. I mean, I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to learning, so happy to go on and on about that. But I think essentially, yeah, how I got here is I've always been, I think, hardwired and enjoyed learning. And then early on, leaving like kind of that school and then going to work, right? I discovered, I was like, wait a minute. Oh, my mom was a school teacher, right? I'd just gone through school, and my dad had been in business and doing sales. And then all of a sudden I kind of run across this organization, Learn It. And it's like, oh, they're going to set up and help do learning, or at the time, corporate training. It was like such an interesting thing. And I remember talking to a mentor about it. He's like, oh yeah, that's a great, you should go that route. That's like an evergreen kind of opportunity. People are always going to need to learn and should always be investing in themselves and in the people in their organization. So yeah, go check it out. It's like, oh, okay, awesome. That sounds great, because it dovetails with exactly what my passions are. And then what's been exciting is what we try to do is just help make sure that people have I'd say like that they know that learning is part of business. It's part of your job. It's kind of like in your MO that you should be having that set up. So we, a lot of like what we try to do is help set that stage for folks. And that's what's exciting, because a lot of people, most of us, we're all learning machines, and to make it fun and to make it relevant is, just a really neat opportunity, because I don't think a lot of people in business think of it in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Matt. And thank you each for giving us just a kind of backdrop of who you are. And really now we'll dive into the topic and kind of specific, actionable tools that our audience and we can all use to really get better about building those better learning habits, or making it a habit of learning. We're learning every day just by stepping outside our doors, but really making it an integral part of how we move through our career, life, relationships. So Kristen, I want to start with you. So your book, Better Daily Mindfulness Habits, Simple Changes with Lifelong Impact, shares practical tools we can all use in our daily lives. So can you share with us one or two of those habits, those specific habits, and why they're important?
Yeah, for sure. So I'd love to share some specific habits, but I think it would be also helpful to kind of break down the sort of the design of habits, how we actually change our behavior. So maybe I'll do that first. Does that work for you, Carly?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, cool. So back in early 2020, right at the beginning of that year, right before the pandemic really descended on us, I sold my company, and it gave me about a year-long runway to learn. And I did certifications that year, and I did a ton of, we were all sort of stuck at home. I don't think I'm alone. I think a lot of people used that time to learn, but I was definitely one of those people. And one of the service certifications that I did that really just lit me up was with BJ Fogg. And some of you may be familiar with his book, Tiny Habits, but he ran a 12-week habits coach, sort of habits teacher certification program that I took and thoroughly enjoyed. And what I learned from that is that we're generally, unless you have become a habit nerd like I have, we're generally pretty haphazard around how we change our behavior. We think that by wanting something bad enough, or by being disciplined enough, or having enough grit, that we can change our behavior. And it's just simply not true. We need a strategy. We need a plan. And so what I loved about BJ Fogg's approach, and he's a behavior scientist at Stanford University, is that he breaks it down into like a science, like an actual roadmap for how we do this. So I thought I'd go through that really quickly. So the first step is, obviously, we have to know what it is that we want to do. So I'm going to use an example in my life to sort of break that down. I wanted to do more learning. I wanted to figure out how I could create more opportunities to learn in my life. So I started to step 2 is I started to explore some of those options. Like, do I want to read more? Do I want to listen to podcasts? Do I want to maybe transition to audiobooks? Do I want to sign up for courses? And what I landed on is that I really wanted to watch more documentaries, and I had signed up for masterclass. And so I wanted to make sure that I used that, because I think it was like a couple $100, and I didn't want that to be wasted. So I wanted to figure out, okay, what's the behavior? So I identified the behavior I wanted to build a habit around was to watch more documentaries, and or really use my masterclass subscription. So the next step is matching those behaviors. So I started to kind of look at the landscape of my life and think, okay, where could I do that? Where could I do that with some consistency? And what I first tried out, and again, I'll say this probably many times, it's an experiment. I experimented with doing it at night. So around 7:30, I thought, oh, this is great. Mark and I will watch a documentary, or we'll watch a masterclass. And I gave that a try. So I thought, here's the behavior I want to do. And I'm going to attach it to a time of day that I typically have downtime. So I experimented with that, and it didn't really work, because sometimes our evenings shifted. Sometimes maybe we were out and we didn't get home till late. Maybe we just got caught up doing something with the kids. And also, Mark wasn't really jazzed about some of the things that I was jazzed about. I am a fanatic learner, and he is probably a few levels down from that. He still learns a lot and reads a lot, but not like I am. So he was kind of like, let's watch Jack Ryan or something like that. And I'm like, no, let's watch this nerdy thing about, soil or something like that. So quickly came to realize that, that wasn't the right place to put that behavior. Kind of went back to the drawing board. Where can I create this habit? And so what I eventually discovered is, wow, I'm in my home gym in the morning. And sometimes I'm doing a class like on my Peloton app, but sometimes I'm just on my treadmill, or I'm just doing weights on my own, or I'm doing some mobility. And I thought, let me try that out, because we have a TV in our gym and I can plug my phone in, and it actually screen shares. Well, that was the winning combination, because I'm in my gym most mornings of the week, probably 5 or 6 times a week. And I have this sometimes 20 to 60 minutes block of time where I can either do a masterclass, or I can listen to, or I can watch a film. So that's the sort of the process I'm kind of working through. Now, one of the things that BJ Fogg really drove home was the start tiny. So that's not a great example that I did that, because I didn't really start tiny. But the idea is, we're looking at the landscape of our lives and figuring out where is the best place to integrate this behavior that I want to do. So, and then we find a good prompt. So my prompt was exercising. The TV was there, so it made sense. And then, of course, BJ Fogg says you celebrate your success, and then you continue to keep going back to the drawing board. How can this habit be improved? How can I better solidify it into my life? So wanted to just kind of start there to give you a little bit of an overview of how habits are created, and even just to plant the seed that habits are created. It's not just a desire that we have that we suddenly hope flourishes. We actually have to cultivate it, almost like a garden. We have to work at it. I'll just pause there, see if there's any questions or comments.
Yeah, thank you, Kristen. I think that piece also around like trying, like which part of the day what method resonates with you and like is actually going to be sticky, right? Like you trying it with the end of the day, evening, with a partner or a friend, and that not really being a sticky point for you, but being in the morning when you're moving your body, and that being like something that ended up resonating with you. I think that's also an interesting point around habit forming, of how it's specific to kind of what works for you in your natural kind of routine or the way you like to go through your day. Damon, before we move on, anyone have anything to add on to anything Kristen said?
Well, I was just curious, Kristen, and I think we spoke about this before, but do you find different times of the day that you learn differently or you retain more, really?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, you and I talked about this on my podcast. When I fall asleep at night, I read a novel.
Mm-hmm.
I don't count on my brain to really be able to do much except just passively be entertained by a fiction, right? So I definitely do the best learning before noon. I think a lot of people are like that. Your brain's really fired on, especially I think if you exercise. I feel like that really kickstarts your brain for the day. Yeah, definitely. That's a great question. What about you?
I'm similar in the sense that, yeah, I try to read nonfiction or work related stuff in the morning, and, around bedtime, whatever, pick up a novel and go from there, or watch something fun.
Yeah. Awesome. Damon, kind of leading into a question for you, I feel like whenever I talk to you, you've just finished or like just gobbled up like 3 new books. And Kristen, I think you're the same way. Matt, you're the same way. But I'm always like, how does he do it with like 2, like a toddler and Lucy, who, just like your life is so full and running a company. So how do you stay motivated to consistently and continuously pursue learning opportunities, despite, demanding professional responsibilities and, having a growing family at home?
Well, I think a lot of times running a company is also similar to being a parent. And for me, I always want to be consistent with my learning side, because I want to always continue to get better. And if I feel like I'm not staying abreast of what's going on, either both as a parent, but especially in work, like if I'm not reading up on Bloomberg or watching the news or learning what's out there, then I'm going to fall behind, which in return would hurt learn it. Will not learn it get advance. So I'm very motivated by doing right by my team and my family, and I'm just a curious person who loves to learn. And really, what I've been able to do is similar to which I think, first of all, Kristen, thank you for taking the time to share a little bit more about habits. But for me, it's all about consistency. So for me, it's when I first wake up, I don't necessarily go right to looking at email or whatever. I kind of force myself to read for at least 15 minutes minimum. And that could be on a book that I'm reading, or it could just be like, what are the top 5 things that Bloomberg talks about what's going on in the market? So I want to make sure that I get that out of the way before I dive into other things. And then, and just kind of read widely, watch documentaries, and just try to be as well-rounded as possible. But one thing I think that we should consider also as learning habits is everyone you come in contact with and everyone that you meet, you can learn something from them. They're better, or they know more about a topic than you do. And so one of the habits, try to get out of my comfort zone when I'm out and about, and if I meet new people, is to really listen to what they have to say, and find out what they're passionate about, and you can really benefit from learning from them. So I think that's one of the learning habits I could say the main learning habits I have are: first thing in the morning, I want to read something productive. And then when I get out and about, and especially around people I'm not as familiar with, kind of ask questions and listen and learn new topics and subjects from them. And as you do that over time, it gets easier and just gets more consistent. And it makes you, be able to participate in different conversations more. So that's what really keeps me motivated to learn. And yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Damon. Truly, I think, like you said, also seeing the opportunity of meeting new like new people or people that are going to challenge you or having a different perspective as actually a habit of learning, whether that's, asking someone you don't know to go for coffee or, talk on the phone for 15 minutes or get their perspective on an idea you have. I think that's an amazing framing of learning that we don't always think about. So I really enjoy that. Anything, Matt, anything to add there, or Kristen?
I think those are great. I think the one thing that comes to mind that Kristen and both Damon, I think, touched on, but like to say it more specific, that really helps enforce these things is the identity, right? Like if you identify yourself as a lifelong learner or a learn it all, right? Like that also will, that's what really kind of carries and helps you identify and look for those opportunities to invoke habits and things like that. And I know that of our panelists, like that's very much ingrained. But I also think that that's one of the things, for when we're working with organizations, we're trying to help people understand that, learning is a part of what, like I said earlier, part of your work is learning. Being excited about that is part of the deal. It should be purpose driven. So intrinsically motivating things, or what intrinsic motivation is what makes things happen. And when you read like Dan Pink's thing too, the big ones he talks about is mastery. So someone needs to get sharp on something, like that will drive you and get you motivated, right? And then also purpose. And Damon touched on the purpose, right? Like the purpose is thinking of something greater, like learn it, an organization, right? And the people that are part of that organization. So I think those are just other things that, well, they also just make that part of what Kristen was talking about, coming up with those habits. Damon talking about what he does in the morning to help kind of force himself into doing something. So anyway, just a little bit of kind of what my thoughts are and how I know I easily identify that I'm like curious. Learning is a big thing for me. I also understand that that's not for everyone, like Kristen touched about, right? How, you and someone, even the closest person in your world, are not coming at it very differently. And so I'm always kind of have to catch myself and appreciate that. And that's all good.
Yeah.
And I'll just jump in and add really quickly that going back to what you said, Damon, about using opportunities when we're interacting with other human beings as learning opportunities, is that I think as human beings, we're unfortunately wired to seek out sameness. Oh, you went to Italy too. Oh, I also grew up in Buffalo, whatever. And I wish, it's not just a wish, like I think a really great habit that we could create is to look for where we're different, like to actually start conversations with like, what do you know a lot about? Or what are you really passionate about? Or what are you interested in? That maybe something, and like really seeking out, like, where are we different? And being really interested in that, than always trying to sort of find more sameness with each other. I think we would grow so much more if we had that outlook of really embracing how we're different and how much we are how much value comes from being surrounded by people that are really different from us, rather than all of us living in these sort of echo chambers of things we already know and things we're already sure about. So that really inspired me, Damon, when you said that today.
Well, I think part of the reason why it happens with the sameness is because it's a little bit more uncomfortable to get involved in a conversation that maybe you're not familiar with, so especially with somebody you don't know that well. I know I've meet quite a few people, and they're in businesses or industries that I'm not really familiar with, especially things like crypto, and just ask them a little bit more. And sometimes people are afraid to get out of their comfort zone because they don't want to be vulnerable and sound stupid on the topic. But it's totally fine to be like, hey, cool, I don't know anything about crypto. Can you tell me a little bit more? And then actually listen to what they have to say. And it's fun because people at that point, then they enjoy telling you about what they're doing and what they're learning. And people understand that you can't know everything about everything. So no, I'm in agreement with you. It's a little bit tougher. It's much tougher. Somebody asked a good podcast to recommend, and I recommend Kristen's 60 Mindful Minutes.
Well, thank you. Well, and one of the things we were going to talk about today is how can we make learning successful? And I was reflecting on that before our time together. And I think that the number one thing is having a beginner's mind. And last year, I read a book called Beginner by Tom Vanderbilt, and he talked about how we're really good at being beginners for like the first 12 years of our life. Like we're in soccer and we kind of suck at that. So we get put in gymnastics and maybe that's good for a while. And then we shift it up and now we're in judo or something. And it's totally forgivable that in all of those stages that we can look foolish, that we don't know what we're doing, that we're a beginner, and it's totally fine. But something happens around 12 or 13 where all of a sudden you're supposed to become an expert at something. And so you'll notice with kids, all of a sudden that's sort of like that lane for gymnastics, let's say, gets very narrow. Now it's like, well, if you want to continue in gymnastics, it's now 5 days a week and you got to be competitive and you're traveling on weekends. And so we start to like send this message to kids, but also to ourselves, that it's not okay to be a beginner after a while, to be like, I don't know, and to look foolish and to go through that stage where you're a little incompetent. But the truth is that we have to get comfortable with that phase, because it's the only way, to use your language, Matt, from Daniel Pink's book, to mastery. We have to start as beginners. But as adults, we're quite allergic to the discomfort of being a beginner. And so a skill that I think ought to be developed is the skill of being a beginner, having a beginner's mind, being able to go, oh yeah, I shouldn't be able to get this yet. I just started. My husband and I just started playing pickleball a couple of weeks ago. And I actually think this reason the sport is so popular is because you can move to a proficient level of pickleball very, very quickly. It's pretty amazing, especially if you have any basic athleticism at all. It's an easy sport. And so I think that as adults, people are gravitating to it because that discomfort of like, ugh, I suck, is pretty short-lived compared to if you went, my husband and I took dancing lessons. We bought a 10-pack. We lasted 2 and asked for our money back because it was so uncomfortable to be so bad at it. So, and again, like, it's just something to notice, like, ooh, I suck at this drawing class. Ooh, I'm not good at this. And it's like, yeah, of course you're not. You're a beginner, and it's okay to be a beginner.
I know that we need to get to Matt's question in a second, but one thing I want to throw out there before we move on, another book recommendation is Range by David Epstein. And it's really, it really talks about generalists versus specialists. And it kind of reminds me a lot of what you're saying here is, even early on, trying different things and not really pigeonholing yourself into one specific area. I think that there's a lot of value. A lot of people come to me and say, I want my kid to be a Division I baseball player, drafted, like you were. So I have them playing baseball around the year, this, and that. And I tell them that's the exact opposite thing you should do. You should have them in all kinds of different sports. Have them playing piano. 1, they're going to get burnt out. But 2, broaden your skill set and your understanding and try different things. And I think that falls a lot in there. It also kind of makes you continue to have the beginner's mind, Kristen, that you mentioned, is trying new things and doing things. And I think it actually helps you specialize later on in your life. Once you've had the ability to try a bunch of different things, then you can specialize where you're going. So Range by David Epstein is I couldn't recommend that book more. That's it for me, Carly. You can move on.
No. Thank you. It's meant to be an open conversation. So, and also we had Kalina, hi Kalina, in the chat asking for documentary and podcasts recommendations as well. So we can bring those in more as well. So the more books we can reference, more documentaries, and I'll also drop those in the chat and send out that list at the end of the event for everybody. So anyways, everything we've referenced here we'll send out as a takeaway resource after the discussion as well. So but also Matt, I want to connect this also to, of course, at the individual level, kind of that we've been talking about from your perspective, also kind of building, learning programs for companies at scale and helping them think about bringing learning initiatives, to teams. How have you seen, like, can you share a little bit about how you've helped teams kind of help companies help their teams build better learning habits. So making that learning sticky kind of at an organizational level.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, I think that is, that's what's exciting and fun to do with what we've done. So trying to make it, I think there's a few layers to how to make it effective. Like when they get into like the workshops with learning and things like that, our instructors have a great way of lining it up and creating that opportunity for people to get excited and motivated. And they also create it as a safe place, right? Like to touch on Kristen's part, like that uncomfortableness of a beginner's mindset, being a little bit vulnerable like that in a professional setting can be tough. So that's one part of an aspect of when you're learning and learning with others is having it place in a safe environment to do that and feeling that. But like simple things that I think we try to do is a lot of times customers come with us and they want to know the tactics of like how to get it done, right? How to execute on upskilling project or program or setting up a program. I think one thing that we invoke and embed in our process is to also make sure that we understand the strategy of what the bigger picture of what we're trying to accomplish. So that's one piece that we kind of try to do that. But specifically for individuals, I think something that we kind of do with when we're doing instructor-led classes is just simple things like thinking about when they're going to offer this to their folks. How much time in advance are they going to let people know to plan and block out the time? Because it's an intimidating thing to kind of have time set aside within our busy schedules. So just thinking about what time of the day, what day of the week, even know what times to avoid around holidays or if there's end of year planning. So it's just making sure that people are kind of like can be in the right mindset, if you will, to kind of be open to an environment where they're going to be safe, sharp, and have that opportunity to learn with people. So I think there's a lot of just setting up the conditions in that way. And then that helps get people excited and help them identify that, learning is a part of what I am as a person and what we do as an organization. And one of the things that we do, a little kind of thing that we embed in our process so that they know the organization's behind it. So we'll often recommend that the sponsor of the training, maybe an executive, sends out an invitation or a reminder to folks about, hey, we've set this up, and reminds them that they have permission, right? And they've seen, oh my gosh, Damon sent me a message about this workshop. So he actually, they want me to take some time to invest and learn and get, develop myself. Like, how cool is that? So.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Damon and Kristen, anything to add to that?
Sure, I'll add a few thoughts. First is, I think, spending the time to kind of get an idea of what type of learner you are and what your ideal conditions are. I think, Matt, you were really pointing to that, is really, really important for a couple of reasons. I think number one, the idea that there's different types of learners is becoming so destigmatized in our culture now. The idea that someone is dyslexic is actually becoming something to be celebrated rather than something that they would want to hide. And so if you do identify as someone who is challenged with too much writing or too much talking, or you don't even have to be diagnosed with a certain specific learning divergency. I know that I don't do well with self-guided learning. So I don't sign up for courses anymore when there aren't people and times that I have to show up. What works for me is that I'm on a setting like this. There's lots of, it's like the Brady Bunch. There's all these people and it's live. And what works even better is if I'm being graded or there's some sort of certification. I don't care. I don't hang them up on my wall, but it motivates me. It helps me stay committed. I was in a course recently and we were given in real time a case study. We had about 3 minutes to look at it and then get in a group and then talk about what we would do. And I met with the facilitators later and I said, just so you know, if anyone was dyslexic in that group, they would have been extremely challenged by that. What I recommended was that they give the case study out ahead of time. I wouldn't have needed to read it because I like to be on the fly. My brain works really well with like, what do you think right now? But that's not the case for quite a lot of people, whether they're dyslexic or not. My husband's more of a let me just go into my cave and think about it for a while. He does not like spontaneous brainstorming sessions where he's put on the spot. to use that creative part of his brain. So I think embracing the learner that you are and then advocating and seeking out the learning conditions that best suit your learning style. I think that's really, really key. And I think more than ever in the history of mankind, have we been more open to that and compassionate and open-minded, and we're moving in such a great direction in terms of being open to all different types of learning styles. That makes me so happy.
Yeah, I agree with that. And because everybody's different, and I think it's important, and I talk a little bit about this in my book, you want to play to people's strengths. So if your strength is on-demand, self-paced learning, then that's where you should focus. And if it's live instructor in person or virtual, go there, or even watching documentaries. So try to identify for yourself, but also if you're leading a team, listen and get curious about what works best for your team members. One of the recommendations I have for those of you out there, and we talk about this a lot, we see this with our customers who have a strong learning culture, is a lot of companies have PTO. I like to look at it as companies should have LTO, learning time off. So companies should really incorporate that into their employees' time, because it's hard. It's hard to you put something on the calendar and say, here, we have this feedback class, and then leave it up to the employee to like, oh, I can make it, I can't make it. But if you say, hey, we want to create that space and allow you to have that time and motivate the employee to take advantage of it, or a leader yourself. So I think dedicating time like that and having the mindset of learning time off, this is important for you get to do it, instead of just, this even goes for self-paced learning, right? Even if you're a self-paced learner and you want to pick up new skills, and you should be able to carve out that time during your workday to do it, especially if it's related to what your job is. So I think that's just something to be mindful of. LTO.
Yeah. Well, and I would add to that especially if we get into the sort of grittier, sort of more granular parts of like how to learn, and I know you will all agree with this, is that the pinnacle of learning is when you teach it. So if you're a company that is thinking about integrating LTO, I would have that. There would be also, a fine print that says when you come back from that course or that retreat or that day of reading, whatever it is, that you present something for 15 minutes. It doesn't have to be a fancy PowerPoint, but that you somehow have integrated, how would I share this with other human beings? Because it may or may not benefit the people that you're talking to, but holy cow, is it going to benefit the integration and absorption of whatever it was that you learned?
I absolutely couldn't agree more. We do at Learn It, obviously we're a learning organization, and that's where we help our customers, but we try to supply our team, I think Carly and Matt can attest to this, outside learning, go out and find either some of our competitors or just external learning opportunities, even listening to podcasts. And then I ask them to come back and present it to the team. And, even if it's for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, because I think that really helps big time ingrain what you learned, so just presenting it back. I'm just kind of piggybacking, Kristen, off what you said, is a super important, instead of just like reading a book, forgetting 95% of it. But if you read a book and you come back and you say, hey, I want to share, I'm lucky, I have a captive audience, so I could kind of say, hey, everybody, let's do this. Let's talk about Adam Grant's Think, or book, or whatever. And being able to share back what you learn is a great way to increase your retention, your stickiness.
Absolutely. I think so too. I think one thing just to add to, I think, Kristen, what you said of like how we learn, for me, I'm more of a slow processor. So if I learn something, it's going to take me a long time to kind of think about it. Might have to journal about it, write about it. My sister is like ready to give a pitch on what she just learned like 10 minutes after. Like she's logged it, she's ready to go. And so I think like having that like self-awareness of being like, okay, this is kind of how I operate, interrelationally, and how I learn. then something that even you can go to your organization and be like, hey, I went to this great thing. I need 2 to 3 days to think about it, and I'd love to present next week. Or you know what I mean? But if you're the quicker processor, you can be like, hey, I'd love to talk to you. If you're my manager, I'd love to talk to you tomorrow about this. I have a great idea on how this comes into a strategy play at work or something. So I think also at the organizational level, there also being that tie with like a manager and their direct report of like, how do we both learn? And then how can we kind of have a strategy together to, to work together better? Because if you know how your manager works and you know how you work, I think those have been my most successful professional relationships, or when we're very aware of how the other person kind of learns and operates. So I think that's a big piece at all. I want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges around consistent learning habits. We had John in the chat ask about, like, how do you add learning time into your calendar, right? Where we're all busy, but some of the challenges. I'm curious what some of the challenges are that you have faced, maybe an example, and then how you've kind of been able to overcome that, or maybe get over the hurdle to make something a habit when you were faced with a challenge.
You want me to start, Carly?
Yeah, Kristen.
Okay, good. All right.
Yeah.
So I'm going to come at it from kind of a different angle, and that is that we have to stop doing some things in order to just make room for more learning. And so the thing that we have to stop doing is defaulting that every time we buffer, which means every time we are transitioning between other tasks, or we're in some version of a pause in between this thing and that thing, we would be so benefited by creating habits around not specifically just like, oh, I just started this pot of rice and now I'm going to check my phone, or I just got out into my car and now I'm going to check my phone. So a habit that we could create, especially when we're at home, but also in the office, is that we stop keeping our phone in arm's length of us, because it's just too easy of a habit. My notifications are always off, and I'm always in do not disturb mode, always. If anybody calls me who's not on my favorite list, you will always get my voicemail. And that's not because I'm a weirdo. It's just, I do not want my phone taking me away from whatever it is that I've chosen to do. So in our house, we have phone-free blocks where everybody puts their phone in the phone jar. At night, I will put my phone in a drawer, so I just don't grab it. I'll put my book that I'm reading where I would normally put my phone. So now I'm going to start reaching for that. So I think a key thing is looking at what are sort of my obstacles for learning, and how do I move those out of the way first before I start trying to kind of seed. It's like weed the garden first before you start planting the seeds, because otherwise the seeds are going to compete with the weeds.
Yeah, I love that. The phone, I think, can be just a huge distraction for all of us, and also a way to learn, right? Of consuming maybe a quick video or content quickly. But I think finding a way that you can do that in a productive way versus a distracting way is huge. So
I like the phone jar. We always talk about phone free dinner or something like that, but maybe have a little jar you put your phone in.
Yeah, it's a big cookie jar that we have on our counter, but instead of putting our cookies in it, we put our phones in it.
I think that's genius. I mean, that's really putting on, like, it is thinking about when trying to integrate it, right? Wherever you can do your environment, it can help support those things, right? So if it's, I have a book that's on my pillow, right? So that just reinforces that before I go to bed, I'm going to be reading, right? I've gotten certain things. There'll be maybe an article that I've kind of like started, and then I realized I pulled myself away and I go, it's not the right time. And I'll actually physically print that. And then I'll have that printed article next to my work environment for later in the day when there's a better moment to kind of do that. And then actually technically I also highlight and kind of, like to Damon's point, share. So I think forcing and thinking about how environmentally you might be able to set that up is good. I want to touch on one of the things too around like learning types. I think the other thing that we have to kind of like give ourselves grace about too when learning or recognize around learning is not so much about learning types, but also just kind of where you're at with certain topics and understand, like Kristen shared, how exploring books, courses, things like that, like I think we always want, I think it's good to always foster general curiosity all the time, but also recognize that like there's certain times or seasons where you're going to be learning and want to need to learn more, right? So it can always be embedded, but taking courses or being a coach and things like that, those are big inflection points and aren't always kind of like present. But I think just kind of so that's one of the things that, you know, try to help focus and direct people on is understanding where you're at. And then for leaders to also understand with their people that they want to encourage learning, to really tap in and understand their style and also kind of where they're at with certain topics, so that sets the right expectation. One thing we do like in the programs is we usually set up like, hey, we want to set up an expectation. That's not like a goal or something mandatory or things like that, but here's generally what we expect would be people will develop and then come up with a, you know, whatever it might be, X number of time. Damon's point with that LTO, learning time off, like the best practices is he said that 20, you know, there's a 70-20-10 principle of learning within business. That would be like 400 hours of learning. So, and that's, you know, not a lot of people would think about doing that much deliberate learning within their work. But those are, if you want to break it down and think about tactical things like that, you can set an expectation of this number of hours. And then you have workshops, right, that maybe support that, or coaching sessions, things like that. So anyway, but I think knowing that you're not always going to be, you know, a course is not always what you need at that time. But know that, you know, when you're ready for a certain topic or something event happens, then I think people know that they can go to those things. So.
Yeah, I think great point, Matt, around knowing at what time, right? A certain time in your life or career, what resonates at that point for you is a really important thing to kind of self-identify, and goes back to the awareness piece, Kristen, that when we were prepping for the panel, you were just talking about this, like self-identifying with different learning habits. So we have about 5 more minutes or so before we close out, but I wanted to just open it up to all of you. Damon, anything like really pertinent that, you know, just if there's a certain skill you think we all should really be developing to be better learners, just anything you want to kind of embed that we haven't kind of touched on already in the conversation.
Sure, but I'd also like to thank everybody in the audience. There's a lot of good comments and advice there too. I think these days, one of the number one skills that you should consider learning is learning agility, the ability to learn. And the reason why I say that is if you look at the lifespan of a skill these days, it used to be 3 to 5 years. Now it's down to 6 months. And whether that's because of AI or whatever it is, the ability to learn and continue to evolve, learning agility, I think is critical. And that's kind of what we're all talking about here today. But I mean, that is key. I think almost even more than just about any other skill is your ability to learn and retain and adapt.
Amazing. Thank you. Kristen, how about you?
Sure, I'll add a couple of thoughts. First, I'll speak to Matt's point about seasons, and I'll say that the voracious learner that I am right now is very specific to the season that I'm in right now. I have 13 and 15-year-olds, right? They don't really want to spend that much time with me unless I'm taking them to Starbucks or to Sephora. And you know, I have a great relationship with my kids, but it's the season that I'm in. They're individuating. They're off living their own lives. Very different from when they were 2 and 4, and I had one on this hip and one on this hip. And so, you know, yes, at this stage, I can read and consume, and I can be in the gym early in the morning for an hour. I mean, I couldn't do that when they were toddlers. There's no way that I could do that. So I think it's really great to take a step back and sort of geolocate yourself in your life. Like, where am I? Like, what am I up to? What are the demands on my time? What is my bandwidth right now? How much energy do I have right now? What is my mind even interested in right now? And really honor that when you kind of explore where you're at. And then I'll kind of piggyback on that and also add, going back to something that you said, Carly, you said something about being a slower processor or a slow processor. There's a really great book called Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. And I think the last name of the author is Kaufman. And I bring it up because it's really important that when we start to understand the type of learner that we are, that we see how much value we bring to the table. The quick learners, the ones who can sit around a boardroom table and brainstorm, the ones that can present on the fly, these extroverts, they tend to get a lot of the attention and a lot of the esteem, and they seem to be celebrated a lot. But the truth is that the people who go back and they process are typically more thorough. They're typically more accurate. So yes, people who are quick, they can be spontaneous, they can be creative, and they can use that front part of their brain. But the front part of your brain is what you already know. The back part of your brain is much more interested in divergency and newness and novelty and learning new things. And so those slower processors are actually bringing so much value to the table. What we need to do is figure out a way to integrate all of the ways that we contribute to our own learning and to each other's learning, and to be neutral about wherever anybody is. There's no hierarchy. Each have their own value. Each are good in their own way. And really, I think it's time that the fast-talking extroverts stop getting so much of the praise, and we start setting up meetings that are less about creating a platform for those types of people and more about how can I draw out the slower processors, because there's so much gold in there, and maybe I'm just not setting up the right conditions in order for that to come out.
Yeah, thank you, Kristen. I think that also Bindi and again, I also want to echo what Damon said of thank you. There's been so much amazing conversation in the chat. Bindi, Mickey, John, Sabur, everybody, thank you for your engagement here. And that kind of speaks to Bindi asked, how do you use reflection in your learning? And I think that reflective piece, kind of that you just spoke on, Kristen, of reflecting on what you've learned is huge. And a great discussion point. So, Matt, anything to add there?
Yeah, so I think just leaning into what we've been kind of just talking about is curiosity is kind of like that skill. So similar to like learning agility, I think of it also just kind of being curious, and being okay with that, with being curious. So there's a couple of things that one I think is for me, that's one thing that I do, either be curious about others, curious about a topic, curious about solving a problem, just thinking about, and that's often a lot, the skill underneath that is just kind of making sure that I'm thinking about thoughtful questions and positioning those questions in the right way. So I think those are kind of like, those are things that stand out to me as far as like, number one thing to kind of like think about when thinking about for myself personally, I think is the skill that I've naturally was wired at, but also kind of want to help, unpack and make available for everyone to do that. And I think one of the things, we have some things systemically in our systems that make that hard. We're really started in kids. We're told to be right, have the right answer. And then there's less about just kind of getting it right. And so I think making those shifts and giving people permission to have those shifts is a big thing for that.
Yeah, I think that's huge. Great. We have one more really great question that came through the chat. So this will be our last one, but question from Skylar. And she asks, can you talk a little bit about how to balance Matt's point about intrinsic rewards and the discomfort of doing something you're not good at? So kind of how to balance those two. Damon, you want to kick us off? Any thoughts or reactions to that?
No, I'm gonna hand that one off to Kristen.
Yeah, well, I think just noticing how we're motivated, right? Maybe it's like when I finish this book, I'm going to buy myself a latte, or maybe we are more intrinsically motivated, and just knowing, like, I have one child who's very intrinsically motivated, and I have one that's very externally motivated. And so knowing, like, what am I, and putting those rewards in place. Like, why not say, you know what, if I get to 40 books this year, I'm going to go book myself a massage or something like that. Like, why not bake fun into the process and make learning fun? Like, we don't have to be reading boring things that bore us. I think what would make learning intrinsically inviting and enjoyable is that we're really, I think, Damon, you touched on this, like really a very wide range at any given time. I'm learning about economics, and I'm learning about gardening, and I just finished watching the Wham documentary, which was so good. I mean, the takeaway for me is you just don't know really what's happening until someone can take you behind the scenes. And I could go on and on about that Wham documentary, but I think it was Kathleen. Wham is my documentary recommendation, and also Kiss the Ground. I'm watching that right now, and that's so good. But yeah, find out what really lights you up and learn about that.
Well, first of all, I'm being a big 80s music person. I'm excited to check out the Wham documentary.
So good.
One thing I wanted to point out, I think that you brought up, which is true too, I know we're running out of time here, but it's okay to quit a book.
Totally.
You know, it really is. And I've only learned that relatively recently. It's like I would force myself to finish some of these things, and it's such a waste of time because I don't remember any of it anyways. So don't be afraid to, obviously read widely, but if you come across something and you're 15, 20, 100 pages into it and you're like, man, I can't take this anymore, quit it. Move on to something else.
Yeah. Thank you for that permission, Damon, because I have to remind myself of that. Matt, any last things to add before we close out?
No, I think what they said is great. I mean, the big part about intrinsic, you'll know, right? Like whatever's fun and exciting, and like to Kristen's point of like finding things outside, know that there's plenty of learning that I've gotten, and I've pushed myself in other ways, right? Like we all do that, right? Like you pull in stuff from other things that you're doing or trying to learn, that pulls in and reflects in business. So I think that's the biggest thing is like, there are times where I think to also Kristen's point though, making little forces or giving yourself a challenge and then putting a reward in there will help get you, would be a good way to kind of incentivize and push you, and then maybe discover something, right? That you not have discovered, but essentially, we're all there. We're all having a good time. Or that's our main aim, right? And that's what I think is great about learning in general, is it is fun.
And go find your people. Like, we are in such a connected world. Like, go find the person who's crazy about that too. And they might be in Dubai or London, or, they may be in your own neighborhood. This year I got crazy about gardening. And so I joined a CSA, and every week I get to talk to Farmer Alex and be like, how did you grow this? And how do I cook this? And awesome. I mean, yes, I'm getting the food, but it's ended up being this amazing learning opportunity. And I'm asking about why my tomatoes are doing this. And so we have so many opportunities to connect with other people who are really passionate about this thing that we're passionate about it. So like, do that. I think that really accelerates learning as well.
Yeah. For me, that's huge. The community piece of learning, of having a group of people that you can learn with or go, right? For me, I was like, I want to train for the marathon in New York. I'm going to get back into run clubs. So going every Wednesday night, so I totally believe in the power of that as well. But anyways, I want to thank each of you so much for being here and your time and your insights. Just truly, thank you. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Matt, Damon. Also, Kristen and Damon just did a podcast episode together on lifelong learning. So Ben is going to drop that in the chat, but really advise, if you enjoyed today's conversation, really amazing discussion there as well.
And Carly, I wanted to just point out before everybody goes, I want to thank Kristen. We're all three of us learn it, but Kristen, can you share with the audience a little bit about where the audience can connect with you at?
Sure. At KristenManieri.com. You can find out about the book and the podcast and my coaching, and yeah, it's all there. So thank you for that opportunity.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing wonderful advice with all of us. And Carly, you did a great job today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. And thank you for the engagement. Really appreciate everybody's thoughtful advice and questions in the chat. So we'll send out a follow-up again with all those recommendations, and Kristen's information is also in the chat. So thank you so much and have a wonderful Friday.